Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. There were no rats or mice on Fragrant Cloud Peak. Such things could not exist in a cultivation location such as this, not unless they were actually spirit creatures. However, ants were a common thing on the mountain. Ants were an ordinary part of nature, and usually lived in the cracks and crevices of the boulders which could be all over the mountain. They didn't cause problems for the cultivators, and were essentially just an ordinary part of mountain life. As such, few people paid them much attention. Today, however, the disciples on duty around the medicine concocting pavilion were shocked to find that innumerable ants were filing across the ground toward the pavilion itself. The disciples on duty gasped. There were so many ants it was impossible to determine how many they were. The sight itself was enough to make their scalps go numb. What's going on? At the same time, many of the disciples in the various pill concocting workshops cried out in alarm, and the sound of explosions caused by failed batches of pills could be heard. Although the pill concocting workshops were protected by spell formations, they were also built into the mountainside, which meant that the ants could easily get into them through the various tiny crevices that riddled the mountain. All of them were heading toward one particular workshop. That was of course the workshop occupied by Bai Xiaochun, who wore an expression of curiosity as he looked at a black medicinal pill. It was at about this time that he noticed the clamor outside, and suddenly realized that the workshop he was in happened to be filled with ants. The ants almost seemed to have gone insane, and all of them were heading directly toward him. An ant apocalypse has struck Fragrant Cloud Peak. Bai Xiaochun shrieked, leaping to his feet. Unexpectedly, even as Bai Xiaochun leapt to his feet, so did the ants, heading directly toward the black medicinal pill he held. Bai Xiaochun's scalp was completely numb, and the first thing he could think of to do was throw the medicinal pill away. Almost as soon as it left his hand, the ants changed directions, pouncing onto it. The pill was instantly engulfed, transforming into a ball of ants, the sight of which caused the blood to drain from Bai Xiaochun's face. A moment later, the ant ball suddenly collapsed, and the ants scurried back into the cracks and crevices. No trace remained of the medicinal pill. In fact, not an ant remained in the entire medicine concocting pavilion. The ants had come quickly, and vanished just as quickly. Of course, many of the disciples who had lost the spirit medicines they were working on felt a bit depressed at what had happened, but there was nothing they could do about it. Furthermore, the disciples on duty, having determined that no major losses had occurred, decided not to report the strange incident. Bai Xiaochun knew exactly why the ants had gone crazy, but as for everyone else, the only thing they saw was a mass of ants passing through. Bai Xiaochun's heart was still thumping in fear. There hadn't seemed to be anything unusual with the pill he had just concocted. However, he had been very focused on doing a perfect job, a job even better than the previous attempt. Now that he thought about it, he realized that he had actually made some adjustments to the ratios in the last spirit replenishing pill batch. Could it be that the final spirit replenishing pill was something extremely beneficial to ants? Bai Xiaochun shook his head as he thought about how incredible he was. Not only could he concoct shocking medicinal pills, he could concoct pills drove ants crazy. Upon leaving the workshop, he heard the depressed mutterings of the other disciples, and felt a bit guilty. Ducking his head down, he quickly hurried away. A few days passed, during which Bai Xiaochun confirmed that the incident in the medicine concocting pavilion didn't cause any waves in the sect. Finally, he went back, paid his merit points, then selected a different workshop within which to concoct medicine. This time, he started working on the longevity incense. Concocting incense and concocting pills were two different things, and required the use of different techniques. Pills were consumed, whereas incense was inhaled. Of course, the final form was different too, one being a pill, the other being a stick of incense. Considering what happened last time, Bai Xiaochun was very careful in the way he went about working on the longevity incense. 2 months passed, and after using 10 batches of ingredients, he ended up with 7 portions. He left feeling quite satisfied, 7 portions of longevity incense in hand. Back in his log cabin, he performed a 3-fold spirit enhancement, after which the longevity incense changed to a deep violet color. Although the 3-fold spirit designs were somewhat faint, they were still visible. Furthermore, the feeling he got when looking at the incense was completely different than before. Bai Xiaochun looked thoughtfully at the longevity incense, and realized that he himself was also very different than he had been. Before, he didn't understand much at all about spirit medicine, but after concocting some on his own, he was much more knowledgeable. For example, he knew that any type of spirit medicine would have impurities that shouldn't be absorbed into the body, and yet were difficult to separate out. Such impurities could build up inside the body and eventually become so-called medicinal toxins. That was why many experienced members of the inner sect were hesitant to recommend that less experienced disciples consume medicinal pills. Theoretically speaking, much of the medicinal toxins could be expelled out of the body. However, if someone consumed too many medicinal pills and accumulated too much medicinal toxin, it could influence their future cultivation. Therefore, depending on how many impurities existed within a given spirit medicine, it would be classified as one of 6 different levels. Low, mid, high, superior, premium, supreme, he murmured, looking down at the longevity incense. If the medicine was more than 90% impure, it would be considered a toxic medicine and wouldn't be classified in the hierarchy. Furthermore, such medicines would never be consumed unless absolutely necessary. If the medicine was around 80% impure, it would be considered low grade, which was the most common type of spirit medicine. 60% impurity was considered mid-grade, and such medicines were not common. In fact, only true master apothecaries were known to produce such medicines. Medicines which were only 40% impure were high-grade and were rare. As for medicines that were 20% impure, they were considered superior grade, and if they were only 10% impure, they were premium grade. Those were medicines that usually only appeared in large auctions. Then there were the spirit medicines that had no impurities whatsoever, the legendary supreme grade medicines. Before, he hadn't really understood what he was doing when he performed spirit enhancements on the spirit medicines. But after closely examining the longevity incense, he realized that it didn't make it more powerful, the way it did with magical items. Instead, it actually improved the quality of the spirit medicine. The longevity incense he held was now only 40% impure, meaning that it was a high-grade medicine. As soon as he realized this, Bai Xiaochun got very excited. Then he considered the matter a bit more, and decided to make a trip to Violet Cauldron Peak. His purpose was not to visit Big Fatty Zhang, but rather, to visit the only spirit enhancement hall that existed on the south bank of the Spirit Stream sect. There, outer sect disciples could spend merit points to get help from the elders in the Spirit Enhancement Hall to perform spirit enhancements. Although there was still a chance of failure, many disciples frequented the place. After looking around the Spirit Enhancement Hall, and also making some discreet inquiries, Bai Xiaochun was able to confirm that performing spirit enhancements on spirit medicine did indeed reduce the impurities and make them more effective. After returning to Fragrant Cloud Peak, Bai Xiaochun looked excitedly at the incense he had made, then finally lit one stick and took a deep breath. Almost immediately, he felt as full as if he had eaten a big meal. Furthermore, as the aura of the incense spread out within him, he felt warm and comfortable. It was as if the flame of his life force had been fueled, and was now burning a bit hotter. Continuing to inhale the incense, he went on to cultivate the undying live forever technique. As soon as the feeling of hunger hit him, he took a deep breath, and the feeling quickly faded. The 7 sticks of longevity incense enabled Bai Xiaochun to cultivate the undying live forever technique for half a month. During that time, he could sense his undying iron skin growing tougher and stronger. Feeling in very high spirits, he organized his bag of holding, then went down to the market and sold some of the things he had acquired from Chen Fei and his friends. Using the profits, he purchased 10 more sets of ingredients for longevity incense, and then once again began to concoct medicine. Thanks to his constant caution and attention to detail, his success rate in concocting the longevity incense increased, rising from 70% to 80%, and eventually reaching 100%. However, he still wasn't satisfied. Although his success rate had reached 100%, the quality of the resulting spirit medicine was merely low grade. His skill was not something that could be changed in a short period of time, leaving him with only one option: use spirit enhancement to remove the impurities. When he used the longevity incense in cultivation, he would breathe in deeply and feel the true happiness that could be attained in heaven and earth. His undying live forever technique improved with each day, as did his cultivation base, which was now nearing the great circle of the 6th level of qi condensation. His greatest progress was with this undying live forever technique. With only a bit more work, he would be able to achieve a major success with his undying iron skin. Bai Xiaochun's body was far tougher and more durable than before, and when he used the throat-crushing grasp, his fingers were an even deeper black color than before. By that time, though, the longevity incense was beginning to slowly lose its effectiveness. In the end, it did virtually nothing, causing Bai Xiaochun to sigh. He was aware that if you consumed enough of any given spirit medicine, the body would eventually adapt to it, and it would lose effectiveness. If he wanted to continue his cultivation, he would need a spirit medicine that was even better than the longevity incense. Unfortunately, the formulas for spirit medicines like that were strictly controlled. It was impossible to purchase them at the market, they could only be acquired with merit points after being promoted to journeyman apothecary. The only other option would be to go to a larger market, but places like that were some distance away from the sect. After considering the matter, Bai Xiaochun lit up with determination. I'm going to get promoted to journeyman apothecary. Considering his experience concocting medicines, as well as his skill with plants and vegetation, it shouldn't be too much of a problem to qualify for promotion. However, just to be safe, he spent the following several days buying a few more random medicine formulas. After concocting each one a few times, then analyzing his failures, he felt much more confident and went to sign up for the journeyman apothecary promotion test. Of course, the promotion test wasn't something held for a single individual. Only when enough people had signed up would the test be held. After waiting for another month, even as he was pondering some matters regarding spirit medicines, his identity medallion inside of his bag of holding began to vibrate. When he pulled it out, an ancient voice filled his mind. Tomorrow at dawn, come to the Journeyman Apothecary Hall, where the test for Journeyman Apothecary promotion will be held. The Journeyman Apothecary Hall was located on the south face of Fragrant Cloud Peak. It was surrounded by lush trees and vegetation, and could only be accessed by a narrow limestone path which snaked off of one of the main thoroughfares that ran up and down the mountain. Unless there was a promotion test underway, few people would walk along that path. However, when the time came for the test, it would be packed. In addition to the disciples who had come to take the test, there were also friends who had come to support the test takers, or even people who weren't confident enough to take the test without first observing it being held a few times. From a distance, the Journeyman Apothecary Hall actually looked like a person sitting cross-legged in meditation. In front of that person was a pill furnace, beneath which was a passageway that led into a main square. Set up in that main square were 20 pill furnaces, all of which looked completely identical. Laid out next to each of the pill furnaces was a bag containing various types of plants and vegetation that could be used in medicine concocting. It was dawn, and Bai Xiaochun, worried about getting lost, had come very early. However, when he arrived, he found that there were people who had arrived even earlier than him. There were dozens of people standing around in groups of 2 or 3, chatting quietly, and even some people who stood apart from the others alone, waiting cross-legged in meditation. Bai Xiaochun wasn't the type of person to sit around like an idiot meditating. After glancing around, he caught sight of Xu Baosai and walked over. When Xu Baosai saw him approaching, he clasped hands in greeting, and the two of them began to chat. It quickly became apparent that virtually nothing went on in the sect without Xu Baosai finding out about it. Elder brother Bai, he said, did you hear that about half a year ago, Chen Fei and his friends were mysteriously beaten into bloody pulps? They've been bedridden ever since, and for some reason, won't talk at all about what happened. Even as he spoke, he looked at Bai Xiaochun carefully to see his reaction. Bai Xiaochun yawned dramatically, and was just about to start boasting about what had happened when all of a sudden, a buzz of conversation rose up in the crowd. At the same time, Bai Xiaochun felt as if someone had suddenly looked in his direction. When he turned his head, he saw a young woman walking toward him. She wore the long garment of an outer sect disciple, but it did nothing to conceal her curvaceous figure. She had a waist as slender as a willow tree, which only served to accentuate the rest of her curves, and make her seem incredibly beautiful. She had long legs, and a perky rear end, and as she approached, people couldn't stop from staring. With her pretty face, and clear white skin that seemed so delicate it might be broken by a faint breeze, she used an attractiveness that could easily prove fatal to almost any man. Bai Xiaochun was a bit disgusted to hear people gulping dramatically, even Xu Baosai. Xu Baosai licked his lips, and his eyes shone with infatuation. That's elder sister Du Lingfei, he whispered excitedly. She's one of the 5 hottest women on the South Bank. She's the immortal beauty of my heart. Oh my goodness, she just looked at me. She's looking at me, Bai Xiaochun said derisively. He simply watched as Du Lingfei got closer. Suddenly, her phoenix-like eyes flickered with a murderous aura as she glared straight at Bai Xiaochun. She had long since come to admit that Bai Xiaochun's skill with plants and vegetation exceeded hers. However, she was still filled with complete and utter revulsion for him. With a slight snort, she walked off to the side. Xu Baosai stared at her in a daze, completely oblivious to Bai Xiaochun's derision. In fact, he seemed more infatuated than ever. So Du Lingfei is going to take the test too, Bai Xiaochun thought. After looking over the 20 pill furnaces, he calmed himself down and focused. Whatever, it doesn't matter. I'm not here to compete with her. This is an exam administered by the sect, not a contest. Everybody has a chance to get promoted. Soon, Chen Ziying appeared, and when he noticed Bai Xiaochun, he hesitated for a moment, then grinned and called out a greeting. Bai Xiaochun smiled and clasped hands in response, after which Chen Ziying sat down off to the side to wait. Eventually, even Zhao Yiduo showed up, whom Bai Xiaochun had first encountered outside the mission's offices. Then, more and more people began to appear, and a good-sized crowd built up. Before too much time passed, the main door of the journeyman apothecary hall creaked open, and an old man walked out. He had a full head of white hair and piercing eyes, and as soon as he appeared, everyone quieted down. The old man's expression was calm as he strode forward with hands clasped behind his back. He came to a stop at the front of the square, looked around at all the outer sect disciples, then nodded his head and began to speak. I am surnamed Xu, and I shall preside over this test for promotion from apprentice apothecary to journeyman apothecary. The test will consist of one portion regarding plants and vegetation, and another regarding medicine concocting. To pass the portion regarding plants and vegetation, simply walk through the passageway. Elder Xu didn't seem to want to offer any further explanations. After speaking only 3 sentences, he simply closed his eyes and ignored everyone. Even as Bai Xiaochun blinked in response, a long-faced young man walked out from the crowd. After clasping hands and bowing to Elder Xu, he strode toward the passageway leading under the giant pill furnace. As entered the doorway of the passageway, a beam of light appeared, which surrounded him, then vanished. A moment later, the pill furnace trembled, then let out 5 muffled reverberations. Xu Baosai leaned over and whispered, 5 reverberations means that his skill with plants and vegetation encompasses the 5th volume. He definitely deserved his reputation of knowing about everything in the sect. Bai Xiaochun blinked again. Before coming, he'd had no idea of how exactly the test would be carried out. Having heard Xu Baosai's explanation, he examined the huge stone pill furnace, and suddenly had the feeling that it must be connected to the stone stels outside the 10,000 medicines pavilion. What do I do now? He thought hesitantly. Zhou Xinqi's fans are still combing the mountain for me. Soon, more people approached, most of whom received 5 reverberations. However, one of them only received 4 reverberations, upon which Elder Xu flicked his sleeve, sending that disciple spinning away. Elder Xu, the disciple exclaimed, face flickering. I thought volume 4 of plants and vegetation was the minimum requirement to be able to take the test. The rules have changed, now it's the 5th volume. But, the young man stared in shock, then bitterly clasped his hands and bowed. Not daring to say anything further, he left. This turn of events caused the sound of whispered conversations to swell. Xu Baosai's eyes flickered with surprise, and he suddenly produced a tiny notebook, within which he began to take notes. Bai Xiaochun looked over and saw a page filled with lines of handwriting, each character as small as the head of a fly. Apparently it was a record of all matters pertaining to the sect, large and small alike. Bai Xiaochun couldn't help but admire how seriously Xu Baosai took the whole matter. It was at this point that Zhao Yiduo stood up and entered the passageway. The reverberations echoed out 6 times, after which Elder Xu opened his eyes and nodded slightly. Zhao Yiduo clasped hands and then stepped out of the passageway. Chen Ziyang's eyes flickered. He and Zhao Yiduo had never gotten along, so he snorted coldly and walked into the passageway, after which 6 reverberations could be heard. After giving Zhao Yiduo a meaningful stare, and sat back down cross-legged off to the side. The fact that both Zhao Yiduo and Chen Ziying had received 6 reverberations caused a buzz of envious conversation to rise up. At the same time, Du Lingfei's eyes flickered, and she walked through the passageway. As she did, 6 reverberations could be heard, which caused even more envious gleams to appear in the eyes of the onlookers. Murmured conversations instantly broke out. Chen Ziying, Zhao Yiduo, and Du Lingfei are all persons of outstanding talent within the outer sect. Not only have they mastered 5 volumes of plants and vegetation, but they also have command of the first volume of spirit creatures. I would say that they have a 70 to 80% chance of passing the test and being promoted to journeyman apothecary. Historically speaking, anyone who takes the journeyman apothecary test having already mastered 6 stone stells will pass, as long as that disciple's performance in medicine concocting isn't lacking. Even as everyone discussed the matter, Bai Xiaochun gritted his teeth. Unfortunately, there was nothing he could do about Zhou Xingqi's fans. Just as he was about to take a step forward, a figure suddenly appeared off in the distance, speeding along the mountain path. It was a middle-aged man, his hair completely disheveled, but his eyes sparkling with life. Even before he arrived, his voice echoed out to be heard by all. I, Han Jianye, having spent 7 years in secluded meditation, and have finally made a huge breakthrough in my skill with plants and vegetation. Finally, I have emerged once again into the world, not just be promoted to journeyman apothecary, but to become the top journeyman apothecary in the entire test. Looking very proud and lofty, he flickered through the air toward the giant pill furnace's passageway. Elder Shu didn't pay the man any heed, not even deigning to open his eyes. However, everyone else in the crowd seemed astonished to have heard the name Han Jianye. Han Jianye? Who's that? I've never heard of him before. Considering how old he is, he must be an outer sect disciple from 7 or 8 years ago. He wants to be the top journeyman apothecary, which isn't a very easy thing to do. Even as everyone expressed their shock, Han Jianye stepped into the passageway, looking extremely proud and confident. Almost immediately, powerful reverberations began to echo out into the air. 1 reverberation, 2 reverberations, 5, 6, 7. Before anyone in the crowd could even react, 8 reverberations echoed out from within the pill furnace. Elder Shu's eyes snapped open, and he looked over at the middle-aged man, a broad smile of praise on his face. 5 volumes of plants and vegetation, and 3 volumes of spirit creatures, he said. Excellent. Looking very excited, Han Jianye clasped hands and bowed to Elder Shu. Then he turned, and when he looked at Du Lingfei and the others, the pride in his eyes was very clear. Swishing his sleeves, he sat down confidently in front of the center-most of the pill furnaces. Finally, gasps could be heard from the crowd, as well as the clamor of conversation. 8 reverberations. Not only did he master everything about plants and vegetation, he even got through 3 volumes of spirit creatures. It seems he might be able to do exactly as he said and become the top journeyman apothecary. When Bai Xiaochun witnessed what happened, he was left feeling quite underwhelmed. Therefore, when everyone in the crowd started getting excited, he almost couldn't believe it. He only mastered 3 volumes of spirit creatures, right? He asked of Shu Baosai. Why is everyone making such a big fuss? If he remembered correctly, when it came to the 3rd stone stele of spirit creatures, over 1,000 people were listed as having passed it. Even the 10th stone stele had been passed by hundreds of people. Shu Baosai rolled his eyes, feeling more contemptuous than ever of Bai Xiaochun. Of course, he didn't dare give voice to that contempt, and instead cleared his throat and said, Elder brother Bai, you just don't understand. To master all 5 volumes of plants and vegetation is hard enough as it is. The volumes of spirit creatures are even harder. Even mastering one of them is enough to make you the subject of much envy. Obviously, to master 3 is even more shocking. Do you think everyone can be consummate chosen like Zhou Xinqi or the little turtle? Look, just forget about those 2. On all of Fragrant Cloud Peak, there are probably less than 50 people who have passed the stone stells of all 5 volumes of plants and vegetation plus all 5 volumes of spirit creatures. Each and every one of those people are dragons and phoenixes among mortals. Think about it, there are a lot of names on those stone stells, but those name lists are thousands of years old. Plus, many of those people have already moved on to the inner sect, leaving only their names behind here in the outer sect. Furthermore, you only need to master 5 volumes to take this test. This guy has 8. Just as he said, he's definitely going to become the top journeyman apothecary, which will earn him the 5,000 merit point prize. Although Shu Baosai's words were actually a bit contemptuous if you paid close attention, Bai Xiaochun didn't really notice. Eyes gleaming with elation, he looked at Shu Baosai and said, "Did you just say that Zhou Xinqi and the little turtle are consummate chosen? Are they really that awesome?" "Of course. Especially the little turtle. He's completely shocking. He's the first person in 1,000 years to get first place in all 10 stone stells. Elder brother Bai, I have to say, you really shouldn't aim too high." Even as the contempt in Shu Baosai's heart rose to new heights, Bai Xiaochun laughed heartily. The more he was around Shu Baosai, the more he liked him. Clapping him on the shoulder, he suddenly strode forward. Shu Baosai gaped in shock as Bai Xiaochun walked toward the passageway. Of course, Bai Xiaochun was somewhat well known for his skill with plants and vegetation, considering that he had defeated Du Lingfei. It was a given that he would eventually take this test. However, what happened next caused Shu Baosai's eyes to bulge. Bai Xiaochun strode proudly into the passageway, after which a flash of light could be seen, and the muffled reverberations began. 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8. Everyone became deathly quiet. However, the reverberations didn't stop. A 9th reverberation echoed out and then, a 10th. Rumble. When the 10th reverberation echoed out, Elder Shu's eyes shot open, and they glowed with unprecedented brightness. He looked over at Bai Xiaochun, completely shocked. It must be stated that it would be rare enough for one of the thousands of outer sect disciples on Fragrant Cloud Peak to master all 10 of the volumes, including the 5 for plants and vegetation, and the 5 for spirit creatures. Virtually all of them would have already taken this test. For someone to be so patient as to wait until they had mastered all 10 was something that Elder Shu had never seen, not until this very day. Even Zhou Xinqi had taken the test after having mastered only 9. Du Lingfei's eyes went wide as she stared at Bai Xiaochun standing there in the passageway. Although she had already known that he was far more advanced than her in his skill with plants and vegetation, she had never imagined that he would have reached such an astonishing level. Not only had he completely mastered plants and vegetation, he also had shocking skill with spirit creatures. Her mind was spinning, and she could do nothing but gape blankly. She couldn't help but recall how she had demanded to compete with him in skill with plants and vegetation, and how he had cautiously and even nervously asked about her ranking. Then she thought about how anxious he had looked when he had agreed to compete. As of this moment she realized that Bai Xiaochun's nervousness back then had been a front, concealing the wide smile that had blossomed in his heart. Bai Xiaochun, she thought, gnashing her teeth. Chen Ziying and Zhao Yiduo also gasped and stared at Bai Xiaochun in astonishment. As for Han Jianye, who had spent so many years in secluded meditation, he began to tremble. He was glaring at Bai Xiaochun, his mind spinning, waves of shock crashing into him as he realized that Bai Xiaochun was definitely his lifelong archenemy. The most important part of the journeyman apothecary test is medicine concocting, he thought. He might be strong, but I refuse to believe that he can outdo me in concocting medicine. I spent 7 years in secluded meditation just to take the top spot in this test. At the same time, the surrounding outer sect disciples were gasping and even crying out in shock. That was 10 reverberations. That means he mastered all 5 of the volumes of spirit creatures too. He passed all of the stone stells outside the 10,000 medicines pavilion. There aren't even 50 disciples in the entire outer sect who can do that. This guy has incredible patience. He waited to pass all 10 of the stone stells before taking the promotion test. Don't tell me, he's the little turtle. The crowd was in an uproar. Of course, most flabbergasted of everyone was Shu Baosai, who was staring at Bai Xiaochun with eyes so wide they seemed to be on the verge of popping out of his head. Moments ago, he had despised Bai Xiaochun for not thinking much of having mastered 3 volumes of spirit creatures, but now, he clearly had every right to have that attitude. Mastery of plants and vegetation and mastery of spirit creatures. Bai Xiaochun was clearly just messing with me. But this is simply unbelievable. He's only been in the sect for a few years. Could it be that he really is the little turtle? Gasping, Shu Baosai pulled out his little notebook and began to write down the new developments. Inwardly, he was rejoicing that he had chosen to smooth things out with Bai Xiaochun, and was also rejoicing that he hadn't said anything too derisive earlier. Even as everyone was giving voice to their shock, Bai Xiaochun walked out of the passageway, sighing. Actually, if there had been a way to conceal his accomplishments regarding the 10 stone stells, then he would have. After all, there were still inner sect disciples among Zhou Xinqi's fans. Unfortunately, there was nothing that could be done about it. He couldn't just give up on the promotion. Despite the fact that he had been forced to reveal the truth, when he saw how excited the crowds were, and when he heard people calling out his name, he was actually quite moved. What wonderful fellow disciples. Ah, if only everyone were like that. Sighing emotionally, and under the eyes of everyone in the audience, he selected a pill furnace and sat down. Elder Shu looked thoughtfully at Bai Xiaochun. A smile flickered across his face, but quickly vanished. After recovered his composure, he calmly said, "The bag in front of you has 10 sets of medicinal plants, which you can use to concoct 10 Tier 1 spirit medicines, specifically, ink spirit incense. You will be judged based on your success rate, with a minimum of 2 successes being the requirement to pass. Whoever has the most successes will be awarded 5,000 merit points. You may begin immediately." The outer sect disciples in the audience instantly began to buzz with excitement in response to Elder Shu's explanation. This time the test is to concoct ink spirit incense. Ink spirit incense isn't the most difficult Tier 1 medicine to concoct, but it's not easy. It's not like spirit condensation incense or other spirit medicines like that, which many apprentice apothecaries have experience with. They're only refining the ways to test one's qualifications in medicine concocting. Can't you see what's happening? Before, they required 4 volumes of plants and vegetation, now it's 5. They even increased the level of difficulty of the spirit medicine to be concocted. Presumably, things will only continue to get harder in the future. As everyone discussed the matter, the group sitting in front of the pill furnaces in the square had very serious expressions on their faces. Although some of them smiled bitterly when they heard that the test involved ink spirit incense, they didn't allow themselves to be distracted, but instead opened the bags and began to inspect the medicinal plants. Shu Baosai had mentioned the matter of the 5,000 merit points earlier. Now that Bai Xiaochun heard confirmation from Elder Shu, his heart was thumping. He was already running low on merit points, which he needed to get medicine formulas and medicinal plants. If I can get those 5,000 merit points, it will save me a lot of time and effort. With those thoughts on his mind, Bai Xiaochun opened the bag, within which were the 10 sets of medicinal plants, plus a jade slip, which was none other than the medicine formula for the ink spirit incense. He didn't immediately begin to concoct the medicine, but instead settled his qi and cleared his mind, then began to study the formula. He took his time, which was how he had grown accustomed to concocting medicine. Even the slightest question about anything needed to be analyzed completely until he felt completely confident. His initial research alone took him 2 hours. By that time, Du Lingfei and everyone else had already finished inspecting the plants, and were beginning to actually concoct the medicine. In fact, most of them were more than half finished with their first batch. It didn't take long before everyone except Bai Xiaochun was already in the middle of medicine concocting. Bai Xiaochun was the only one who was sitting there, looking thoughtfully at the jade slip. That sight left Shu Baosai somewhat shocked. By now, the first batches of spirit medicine were coming out. Rumbling sounds began to emanate from the pill furnaces of everyone except Bai Xiaochun. Most of them had long faces as black smoke rose up, indicating that their first batches were failures. Han Jianye, on the other hand, threw his head back and laughed loudly. His pill furnace was trembling, and a medicinal aroma began to spread out. Shockingly, a 3-inch long stick of ink spirit incense appeared. The surrounding outer sect disciples all craned their necks to look. He succeeded with his first batch. This Han Jianye sure has talent in medicine concocting. An excited expression appeared on Han Jianye's face as he glanced around at the other test takers. His gaze lingered for a moment on Bai Xiaochun, and when he realized that he was still studying the medicine formula, a look of disdain appeared in his eyes. Finally, he pulled out the second set of plants and began concocting a second batch. Du Lingfei and everyone else all had unsightly expressions on their faces, and gritted their teeth as they began to work on a second batch. Time passed. By the time the 4th hour of the test had passed, most of the group was finished with their second batch. Muffled rumbling could be heard as, not a single test taker succeeded. It was at about this time that Bai Xiaochun put the jade slip down. His mind was now permeated with the medicine formula for ink spirit incense. However, just when everyone thought he was about to begin, they were stunned to see him take out one of the medicinal plants and begin to study it closely. What is Bai Xiaochun doing? He already studied the medicine formula for 4 hours. What's the point of studying the plants? I know this is a test, but does he really have to go so slow? Xu Baosai's eyes were wide with disbelief as he watched everyone else starting their third batches. The audience waited in befuddlement as the 6th hour of the test arrived. By now, 18 of the test takers had all consistently failed. Soon 8 hours had passed, then 10. Eventually, 4 people succeeded in concocting the ink spirit incense, including Du Lingfei, Chen Ziying, and Zhao Yiduo. The aura of the incense spread out in all directions. Han Jianye was chuckling proudly at being the first person to concoct a second stick of ink spirit incense. Looking around proudly, his contempt for Bai Xiaochun grew. At this point, Bai Xiaochun was studying the fourth of the medicinal plants. Occasionally he would even tear a perforation into the plant itself, which left the audience shocked. Even Elder Shu had noticed. Time flew by. Soon, 12 hours had passed. Everyone failed in their 6th batch of spirit medicine, except for Han Jianye, who was the only person to succeed. That caused quite an uproar, and even elicited a slight nod from Elder Shu. This Han Jianye has already concocted 3 sticks of incense. Nobody else even has more than 1. In tests passed, 2 successes meant you passed the test, and 4 successes made you a chosen. All Han Jianye has to do is concoct 1 more stick to become a chosen. As everyone discussed the matter, a gleam of self-confidence could be seen flickering in Han Jianye's eyes as he murmured, "I'll definitely concoct a 4th stick of ink spirit incense. I'm going to be chosen, and I'm going to be the top journeyman apothecary." Swishing his sleeve in grand style, he began to work on his 7th batch. Du Lingfei's face was ashen as she gritted her teeth and began working on her own 7th batch. When the 14th hour arrived, Du Lingfei's eyes shone with elation as a medicinal aroma began to spread out from her pill furnace. Even as black smoke rose up from everyone else's 7th batches, she produced the only success. "I've met the minimum, but mere promotion is not enough." Du Lingfei constrained her excitement, taking a deep breath as she, along with the ashen-faced Han Jianye, began work on another batch. In the 16th hour, more rumbling sounds could be heard as yet again, everyone met with failure. As of this moment, of the 19 other people besides Bai Xiaochun who were taking the test, Han Jianye had 3 successes, Du Lingfei had 2, Chen Ziying and Zhao Yiduo both had 1, and everyone else had nothing but failures. As for Bai Xiaochun, he was studying the last of the medicinal plants. This test is so hard. That was the thought running through the minds of the outer sect disciples in the audience. They could feel the anxious pressure building up. Most of the test takers only had 2 sets of ingredients left. With the exception of Du Lingfei and Han Jianye, who had already met the minimum requirement, and Chen Ziying and Zhao Yiduo, who both had 1 success already, the other test takers had to succeed with both sets of ingredients, otherwise they would fail completely. Those remaining disciples were now extremely nervous. Essentially, this 9th batch was the most crucial batch. If they failed, then Elder Shu wouldn't allow them to waste the ingredients set aside for the 10th batch. If that 9th batch failed, then their test-taking effort would be a complete failure. Filled with apprehension and nervousness, everyone focused completely on their 9th batches. Each and every step received complete and utter attention. Those who had already met the minimum requirement wanted to get a better final score, and for those who hadn't met the minimum, they had to do everything they could right now to pass. Bai Xiaochun, on the other hand, was sitting there holding the final medicinal plant. Apparently, he was considering some important question about that plant, as his brow was furrowed thoughtfully. By now, few people were paying attention to him. The 18th hour seemed to pass very slowly. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Soon, rumbling sounds echoed out. As for the disciples who had not succeeded at all, they rose to their feet, faces pale, chuckling bitterly. After clasping hands to Elder Shu, they dejectedly left the square. One by one, the disciples left, until soon, only 6 people remained concocting medicine. Soon, rumbling sounds echoed out from the 6 test takers' pill furnaces, and yet a medicinal aroma emitted from only one of those furnaces, the one belonging to Zhao Yiduo. Zhao Yiduo's hands were clenched tightly into fists, he was panting, and his eyes were completely bloodshot. He was more excited right now than he had ever been before. He had met the minimum requirements. With 2 successes, he passed. Some people were excited, some were depressed. 5 people had failed, 2 of them being disciples who hadn't succeeded a single time. Sighing, they rose to their feet and left. Chen Ziying couldn't be more on edge. He was glaring at Zhao Yiduo, heart filled with bitterness and anxiety. Then he looked with bloodshot eyes at the final set of medicinal plants. Du Lingfei frowned, then closed her eyes to think. Han Jianye felt the least pressure of all, and yet, he wasn't happy to be stuck with only 3 successes. He wanted to break through to become chosen. The last batch. People took deep breaths as they looked out at the square, and the 5 people left behind. Han Jianye, Du Lingfei, Zhao Yiduo, Chen Ziying, and of course, Bai Xiaochun. 3 of them had already met the minimum requirements. Chen Ziying had 1 chance left to do so. As for Bai Xiaochun, people weren't even paying attention to him, and were actually beginning to wonder why he had even come. After 18 hours, all he had done was study the medicine formula and the medicinal plants. Some people were even wondering if he had just come to be a part of the excitement. It was with unprecedented seriousness that Du Lingfei and the others began to focus completely on their 10th and last batch of spirit medicine. As everyone looked on with fixed gazes, the 20th hour slowly passed. Rumbling sounds could then be heard from Zhao Yidia's pill furnace, after which black smoke rose up. He sighed. He had failed in the final batch, but at least he still met the minimum requirements. In almost the exact same instant that Zhao Yiduo failed, Chen Ziyang's pill furnace began to emit a medicinal aroma. His wasn't the only one. Medicinal aromas were also spreading out from Du Lingfei's and Han Jianye's. In that instant, all 3 of their faces lit up with joy as they realized that they had succeeded. I did it. 4 sticks of ink spirit incense. I took the top spot. Han Jianye shot to his feet and his excited laughter began to ring out in all directions. Du Lingfei sighed in relief. Although she hadn't reached the level of a chosen, 3 successes was still astonishing. Chen Ziying felt almost as if he had been resurrected from the dead, and began to laugh heartily. As of this moment, the feelings that the 4 of them had been suppressing for the last 2 hours finally erupted out. What a difficult test. The fact that Han Jianye could succeed 4 times despite this level of difficulty shows that he really is a chosen. Du Lingfei got 3 successes, Chen Ziying and Zhao Yiduo both got 2. They all met the requirements to be promoted. I bet if the test wasn't so hard, they all would probably have been able to get 4 successes. Even as everyone began to discuss the matter, as the friends of the test takers were cheering in support, as Elder Shu nodded approvingly at Han Jianye and was about to announce that the test was over, Bai Xiaochun moved. After fully studying the final plant, and resolving all of the issues he had, Bai Xiaochun continued to completely ignore all of the clamor around him. He had focused hard on the information in the jade slip, had become completely immersed in the Tao of plants and vegetation, and had even entered a sort of trance. Nothing short of the crash of thunder and lightning would be able to break his concentration, nor did he even glance at the results of the others' concocting efforts. Of course, that attracted the attention of some in the audience, including Xu Baosai. Curious expressions could be seen on their faces as they looked over, clearly wondering why Bai Xiaochun had spent so much longer in his initial observations. This Bai Xiaochun is just too slow. Everyone else is finished and he's just starting. Shouldn't the test be over by now? You know what, I don't think I ever heard anything about the Journeyman Apothecary promotion test having a time limit. It wasn't clear who exactly said that last sentence, but when people heard it, they began to turn toward Elder Shu, blank expressions on their faces. Elder Shu hesitated for a moment, but the truth was that the Journeyman Apothecary promotion test really didn't have any time limit. Therefore, he continued to stand there watching Bai Xiaochun concoct medicine. Han Jianye wasn't worried at all, and was even chuckling coldly, eyes flashing with disdain. At first, he had been worried that Bai Xiaochun would be a formidable opponent, but after the way this part of the test had played out, he was convinced that there was no way Bai Xiaochun could surpass him. Du Lingfei's brow was furrowed. Bai Xiaochun rubbed her wrong no matter how she considered the matter. Bai Xiaochun's movements were blindingly fast, and his eyes glowed brightly. To him, the entire world consisted only of that pill furnace. The various medicinal plants rapidly changed form as he kneaded them into pastes, broke them down into powders, or made other preparations. Then, after putting all of the ingredients into the pill furnace, he performed an incantation gesture with his right hand and pointed at the pill furnace, causing the earth flame underneath to burn brightly. 2 hours flew by, and soon a strong medicinal aroma emanated out from the pill furnace. Bai Xiaochun waved his hand, causing a 4-inch-long stick of ink spirit incense to fly out. As soon as it landed in his palm, he examined it and then frowned. Everyone in the audience had very serious expressions on their faces, and Elder Shu's eyes were flickering. However, just when everyone was expecting Bai Xiaochun to start his second batch, they realized that instead, he was simply studying the incense. What is he doing? He succeeded. Why hasn't he started the second batch? Everyone was looking on, stunned. As for Bai Xiaochun, he was looking at the ink spirit incense, feeling quite unsatisfied. Although he had indeed succeeded, he knew that based on the ingredients he had used, the incense should have been 7 inches long. What went wrong? He thought. Then he contemplated the matter for 6 hours. Just when everyone was getting to the point where they were running out of patience, Bai Xiaochun's eyes glittered, and he produced a second set of ingredients and began to concoct. Everyone in the audience anxiously watched him work. Yet again, 2 hours passed. This time, the medicinal aroma was even stronger than before as a 5-inch long stick of ink spirit incense flew out. Du Lingfei's face flickered, and shocked expressions could be seen on the faces of both Chen Ziying and Zhao Yiduo. As for Han Jianye, his eyes flickered, but his expression remained calm. Only he knew that, inwardly, he was starting to get anxious. Of course, what made him anxious was not just that Bai Xiaochun had succeeded 2 times, but that he might continue to succeed. Under the shocked gazes of all present, Bai Xiaochun flicked his sleeve, sending the third set of medicinal plant ingredients out. His third batch was now beginning, and all of the outer sect disciples were watching closely. 2 hours passed in silence. Suddenly, the pill furnace shuddered, and a medicinal aroma even stronger than before filled the area as a 6-inch long stick of ink spirit incense appeared. 3 times in a row. How could this be happening? How is Bai Xiaochun doing this? Could it be that he has actually concocted ink spirit incense before? Cries of astonishment could be heard because of the successive successes. People could hardly believe what they were seeing. Du Lingfei's breath came in ragged pants as she glared at Bai Xiaochun, waves of shock battering her heart. Chen Ziying and Zhao Yiduo were both gaping dully. 3 in a row, Han Jianye thought, clenching his hands into fists. His eyes were now completely bloodshot. He must already be familiar with ink spirit incense. Well, he got lucky with this batch, but the next batch will be a different story. Just when everyone was expecting Bai Xiaochun to start his 4th batch, he held up the 6-inch long stick of ink spirit incense, then frowned and rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Then everyone waited, for 10 hours. If this sort of thing had happened with the first batch, everyone would have left. But after having seen Bai Xiaochun succeed 3 times in a row, they knew that a 4th success would push him past everyone else to the same level as Han Jianye. That was something everyone was itching to see happen. Bai Xiaochun takes way too long. It's only a tier 1 spirit medicine. Why does he need so much time to think about it? Of course, Du Lingfei and Han Jianye were the most invested of all, and were staring dead at Bai Xiaochun, completely unwilling to leave. It was at this point that Bai Xiaochun's eyes glittered brightly. His eyebrows shot up as he waved both hands, sending plants and vegetation flying out as he began his 4th batch. Everyone was now looking on in complete excitement. 2 hours later, rumbling sounds could be heard, but not the type that indicated a failure had been met. Instead, a powerful blast of medicinal aroma spread out, filling the entire area in the blink of an eye. Then, astonishingly, a 7-inch long stick of ink spirit incense appeared. The 4th batch was another success. The audience went wild. 4 in a row. I can't believe something like this actually happened. Just how many times will Bai Xiaochun actually succeed? 2 successes are the requirement to pass, and 4 makes you chosen. If I remember correctly, elder sister Zhou Xinqi got 7 successes back when she was promoted. As the crowd clamored, Du Lingfei's face turned very unsightly. Although she was aware that Bai Xiaochun's skill with plants and vegetation far surpassed her own, to see that such a vast gap existed between them in terms of medicine concocting filled her with mixed emotions. As for Han Jianye, he was grinding his teeth, and his hands were clenched tightly into balls. He was trembling, and couldn't bear to believe what he was seeing. And yet, everything was happening right in front of him, making it impossible for him to deny it. 4 successes. 4 successes has to be his limit. The rest will definitely be failures. Everyone in the audience was now buzzing with speculation regarding how many total successes Bai Xiaochun would achieve. But then, they realized that Bai Xiaochun was simply staring at the ink spirit incense. What is this guy doing? He's doing more studying? Although they were a bit chagrined, the audience members weren't about to leave now. Instead, they sat there, waiting and watching, looking forward to seeing the results of Bai Xiaochun's next study session. 16 hours passed before Bai Xiaochun finally took a deep breath. His eyes were completely bloodshot. Although no one else realized it, the fourth batch he had just produced had come very close to failing. This ink spirit incense is much harder than any of the other spirit medicines I've concocted in the past. Bai Xiaochun was prudent and meticulous. After thinking back to all the other batches he had produced so far, he identified what the problem was, and after confirming that he could prevent it from happening, began a fifth batch. He was completely oblivious to any of the conversations around him. When he was concocting medicine, his level of focus exceeded imagination. It didn't matter what anybody said, he wouldn't begin to concoct unless he was absolutely confident in succeeding. Everyone in the audience had been sitting here for so long that they were completely exhausted, and were having trouble staying focused, and yet they were now all craning their necks to see what was happening. It didn't take long before more rumbling sounds could be heard, and a medicinal aroma spread out in all directions, a fragrant odor that sent shock into the hearts of everyone present. The fifth batch was a success. Han Jianye sat there dumbfounded, heart overwhelmed with bitterness. After a long moment, he simply sighed quietly. This was the moment the crowd had been waiting for. Bai Xiaochun waved his sleeve and began the sixth batch. Before long, more rumbling could be heard, and smell of incense spread out. The sixth batch was a success. Bai Xiaochun's eyes glittered. Not pausing for even a moment, he pulled out more medicinal plants and started his seventh batch. However, in almost the exact same instant that he started the seventh batch, an acrid odor suddenly wafted out. It was very faint, and could only be detected by Bai Xiaochun, and yet it caused his heart to begin pounding. He performed an incantation gesture with his right hand and pointed out, reducing the earth flame temperature. After manipulating the ingredients with the greatest care, he succeeded with the seventh batch. However, this stick was only 3 inches long, and contained many impurities, leaving it on the verge of being low-grade, almost toxic. However, as far as the audience was concerned, that still counted as a success. At this point, the audience was completely and utterly wrapped up in what was happening. Everyone was panting in excitement, especially Xu Baosai, whose eyes glowed with disbelief. 7 successes. Heavens! Bai Xiaochun actually succeeded 7 times. He's just as good as elder sister Zhou Xinqi. I remember hearing that the only person to ever exceed 8 successes was a disciple from years ago named Wang Qingshan, an elder brother who is now in the supreme position of being in the legacy echelon. Succeeding 9 times is completely unheard of. Nobody has ever done it. The audience was in an uproar, but Bai Xiaochun was sitting there quietly, looking at the pill furnace. His eyes were bloodshot, and by this point, he wasn't even thinking about the test. He was immersed in thoughts of concocting medicine, and was analyzing the near failure from all angles. Next, he pulled out the ingredients and began to examine them again to try to determine the cause. This spirit plant is called ink fruit, and the ink elements within each one are slightly different. He held the ink fruit in his hand and continued to observe and analyze it. Time passed, and more wry smiles could be seen on the faces of the audience as they realized what was happening. Although they were excited, Bai Xiaochun was so thoughtfully slow in medicine concocting that it could make one bristle with anger. And yet, nobody was willing to leave. The outer sect disciples all sat there cross-legged, some of them meditating as they waited for Bai Xiaochun. Others were so exhausted that they leaned up against nearby boulders to sleep. A strange expression could be seen on the face of Elder Shu. Coughing dryly, he sat there cross-legged, waiting. Of course, Du Lingfei and Han Jianye weren't going to leave. Although Bai Xiaochun left them physically and mentally exhausted, they had no choice but to sit there quietly. Everything was very quiet, except for the occasional snores which echoed out. And yet, people were still waiting, and watching Bai Xiaochun. Xu Baosai was among their number. Hours passed, during which some people awoke from their sleep to find Bai Xiaochun sitting there in contemplation. They couldn't help but sigh. I can't believe he's still studying. The sun is rising. Eventually, after more than 20 hours had passed, Bai Xiaochun suddenly looked up, and his eyes were completely bloodshot. Bai Xiaochun was panting. By this point, he was focused to the point of tuning everything else out. He wasn't even worried about whether or not he would succeed. His eyes were bloodshot, and his mind was occupied with only one thing: how to be completely and utterly confident. Unless he was totally confident, he wouldn't start the next batch. When it came to concocting medicine, his cautious and prudent personality was fully on display. However, even after all the thought he had put into it, he still couldn't figure out how to solve the problem without first standardizing the ink elements within the ink fruit. Although that wouldn't count as changing the medicine formula, it would be a slight adjustment to it. After a moment of thought, Bai Xiaochun's eyes flickered with determination. The only way is to adjust the formula on a case-by-case basis. He quickly crushed the ink fruit. A squishing sound could be heard as juice flowed out, although Bai Xiaochun didn't send it into the pill furnace. Instead, he congealed it in the air in front of him, then began to make adjustments here and there. Most people in the audience were surprised, but didn't really understand what he was doing. Even Bai Xiaochun himself didn't really think that his actions were anything special, he just felt that this was the best course of action considering the circumstances. However, Elder Shu had opened his eyes, and a gleam of shock flickered deep therein. Although he had been a bit surprised that Bai Xiaochun had succeeded 7 times in a row, what he was doing now was far more shocking. This Bai Xiaochun is actually trying to adjust the medicine formula. Incredible. No wonder the Peak Lord told me to keep an eye on him while he was away from the mountain. Elder Shu continued to observe Bai Xiaochun silently. A moment later, Bai Xiaochun waved his hand, flushing away the extra ink elements, leaving behind a drop about the size of a fingernail. After sending it into the pill furnace, he produced the rest of the medicinal plant ingredients and then began his 8th batch. The pill furnace instantly turned bright red. This time, it didn't take 2 hours. After enough time passed for 2 incense sticks to burn, the pill furnace trembled, and a medicinal aroma spread out. The 8th batch had succeeded. Elder Shu looked at the pill furnace, and what he saw was a 7-inch long stick of ink spirit incense that was black with violet specks. That's almost mid-grade, Elder Shu thought, his eyes shining brightly. Bai Xiaochun could also tell that this stick of ink spirit incense was different than the others. Although he was initially confused, he suddenly realized why all of the other spirit medicines he had produced before were low-grade. The medicine formula isn't standardized. If you adjust things based on your current needs, you can concoct mid-grade spirit medicines or higher. Bai Xiaochun suddenly felt as if the world had been opened up to him. Feeling very excited, and before even waiting for the crowd to break out into an uproar, he started his 9th batch. Everyone was panting, and nobody was talking. They were all completely and utterly shaken. They might have been excited before, but now that they had personally witnessed Bai Xiaochun succeed 8 times in a row, they were in a state of complete and utter incredulity. Not only had he surpassed Zhou Xinqi, he was now on almost the exact same level as the legacy echelon cultivator Wang Qingshan. Before everyone could recover from their shock, Bai Xiaochun rapidly went about concocting the next batch. He only used the time it takes an incense stick to burn before rumbling sounds could be heard from the pill furnace, and a powerful blast of medicinal aroma spread out. The 9th batch was a success. This is unheard of. Nobody has ever succeeded 9 times, and especially not with ink spirit incense. Bai Xiaochun spent an infuriatingly long time thinking, but his success rate is completely astonishing. Xu Baosai's mind was spinning, and his jaw hung wide open. Du Lingfei felt her heart being battered by waves of astonishment, and couldn't help but think back to the competition, and how Bai Xiaochun had analyzed that grafted plant. Han Jianye simply sighed bitterly. Although he was disappointed, he was no longer enraged. If Bai Xiaochun had surpassed him by a small amount, he might have continued to pursue a grudge, but now, he had to admit that he had lost. With only one more success, elder brother Bai will do something nobody has ever done, not even in ancient times. He is going to pull off a miracle. Boy, was it worth it to come watch the test this time. We got stuck here for a few days, but it was definitely worth it. As of this moment, Bai Xiaochun was the center of all attention. Everyone was panting, and their eyes gleamed with intense anticipation. Even Elder Shu felt completely shocked, and was staring with wide eyes. Finally, Bai Xiaochun moved. His eyes shone with focus as he produced the final set of ingredients. After organizing them into the order that he would use them, he began to feed them into the pill furnace, then performed a double-handed incantation gesture to stoke the earth flame. Time passed in complete silence. The only thing the audience could hear was the beat of their own hearts as they waited for the time it takes an incense stick to burn. An intense rumbling sound could be heard from within the pill furnace. No smoke of failure poured out, and yet, neither did a medicinal aroma. Everyone was shocked. Did he fail? Xu Baosai thought, so nervous that his tongue was sticking to the roof of his mouth. Bai Xiaochun stared in shock, but then he suddenly realized what was most likely happening, and his eyes began to shine. It was at this point that everyone watching could see a scintillating light shining out from the joints and cracks in the pill furnace. Elder Xu suddenly leapt forward to peer into the pill furnace, within which was a 1-inch long stick of ink spirit incense that was completely violet. His eyes danced with elation. Mid-grade, he said, laughing loudly. Flicking his sleeve, he collected up all of the pill furnaces and sticks of ink spirit incense which had been concocted. The final round of the test is over. Bai Xiaochun, Han Jianye, Du Lingfei, Chen Ziying, Zhao Yiduo, you 5 have all been promoted to Journeyman Apothecary. Bai Xiaochun, you take the top spot and are awarded 5,000 merit points. The crowd dissolved into wild commotion, the sound of which echoed out in all directions. 10 successes. He got 10 successes. Plus, the final batch produced a mid-grade product. He's only a journeyman apothecary, but can already concoct mid-grade spirit medicine. Xu Baosai, Du Lingfei, Han Jianye, and everyone else present were completely stunned. It was somewhat grudgingly that Bai Xiaochun watched the only mid-grade spirit medicine he had ever concocted be whisked away by Elder Xu. He was of a mind to give voice to his discontent, but Elder Xu seemed too imposing, and was clearly not going to return the incense. Bai Xiaochun sighed and left the square, exhausted. As he walked through the crowd, people looked at him with excitement and admiration. Obviously, the fact that he had succeeded 10 times in a row was no fluke, and was something that an ordinary disciple could never do. Congratulations on pulling off a miracle, Elder Brother Bai. This is completely unprecedented. Congratulations, Elder Brother Bai, I truly admire you. Elder Brother Bai, I have some questions about plants and vegetation, do you think you could help a junior sister out? Bai Xiaochun blinked. He had been so engrossed in medicine concocting that he had completely tuned everything else out. After seeing what a commotion he had caused, he quickly clasped hands and bowed to the audience. At the moment, he felt nothing short of elated. Back when no one knew who the little turtle was, he had never been able to find the right opportunity to make a big debut. Now that he had, he was experiencing exactly the feeling he had hoped for. As for the female disciples who were asking for his help, Bai Xiaochun instantly nodded in agreement. Furthermore, as for all of the disciples who were calling him Elder Brother Bai, he asked them to call him Bai Xiaochun, lest people be unaware of his full name. Just as he was feeling exceptionally proud of himself, he suddenly caught sight of a young man in the crowd, glaring at him. Bai Xiaochun instantly recognized him as one of Zhou Xingqi's devoted fans. Bai Xiaochun's face flickered, and he quickly extricated himself from the crowd and sped off. After hurrying all the way back to his log cabin, he realized that he was feeling a bit dizzy. Having spent days concocting medicine, he was completely drained, and instantly fell asleep on his bed. He slept for 2 days straight. In the afternoon of the 3rd day, he opened his eyes, feeling completely refreshed. Then, he thought back to how he had personally concocted a mid-grade spirit medicine, and how Elder Xu had then taken it away. Sighing, he took a look at his identity medallion to confirm that 5,000 merit points had been added, and then felt a little bit better. With those merit points, he could continue to work at concocting medicine, which would also help him cultivate the undying live forever technique. Next, he made a quick trip out of his residence to retrieve 7 or 8 medicine formulas from the sect. After picking one for vital energy replenishment, he spent some merit points to get a large quantity of medicinal plants. The entire process went quickly, but he was jumpy with fear the entire time. Wherever he went, it seemed people recognized him, and he even noticed some of Zhou Xingqi's fans, who glared at him with cold smiles, then produced jade slips to transmit messages to their cohorts. Bai Xiaochun nervously got all the medicinal plants he needed, then headed, not to his courtyard residence but to the medicine concocting pavilion. Using the remainder of his merit points, he bought an entire year's worth of time, and then holed up. I was a bit careless this time. HMPH, just wait till I come out. I'm going to make a big breakthrough in my undying iron skin, and if you people mess with me, well, if you come at me one at a time, I'll take you out. If you gang up, then I'll just call for the Peak Lord. Snorting coldly, he began to concoct medicine there in the workshop. He could well imagine how, during those 2 days in which he had slept, word of him being promoted to journeyman apothecary had spread. In fact, it wouldn't take long before the entire Fragrant Cloud Peak was talking about it. And of course, that was exactly what happened. Furthermore, many people were already speculating that Bai Xiaochun was the little turtle. There were too many coincidences for there to be any other explanation. Not only had he shown amazing talent with both plants and vegetation and spirit creatures, but Bai Xiaochun had concocted a mid-grade spirit medicine. He had even passed the journeyman apothecary test with 10 successes in a row. Zhou Xingqi's fans immediately sprang into action, as did Du Lingfei's fans. However, none of them realized how cautious Bai Xiaochun was, so much so that he would never return to his residence, but would instead stay at the medicine concocting pavilion. Then they found out that he had purchased an entire year's worth of time in one of the workshops, and they were instantly enraged. However, the medicine concocting pavilion wasn't a place that they could just barge into. Furthermore, Bai Xiaochun's new status struck fear into their hearts. Although they couldn't really do anything to him, if they roughed him up to teach him a lesson, the sect wouldn't care. After all, people who provoked those above their skill level would get what they deserved. However, there was nothing to be done now, so the group which had gathered to catch Bai Xiaochun dispersed begrudgingly. However, there was one of their number, a pock-faced young man, who looked at the medicine concocting pavilion with a cold smile. "You think that hiding in there will keep you safe from me? I couldn't care less that you beat up my cousin Chen Fei. However, you bullied my beloved junior sister Zhou, and also my most cherished junior sister Du. Plus, my favorite of all, junior sister Hu, won't stop talking about you. Bai Xiaochun, you might have talent in plants and vegetation, but killing you won't be any trouble at all for me." The young man laughed coldly. He was none other than the inner sect disciple surnamed Qian Daijin. Bai Xiaochun spent one carefree day after another in the medicine concocting pavilion, either concocting medicines or cultivating his undying live forever technique. As the days went by, he truly did advance by leaps and bounds in the undying live forever technique. His skin became tougher and more durable, and he could move even faster than before. Another 2 days, and my undying iron skin will be complete. Bai Xiaochun took a deep breath, and his eyes gleamed with elation. However, it was on that very night at dusk that, all of a sudden, a green beam of light shot from the mission's offices toward the medicine pavilion. It completely bypassed the protective shields surrounding the pavilion, and appeared right there inside of Bai Xiaochun's workshop. Bai Xiaochun gaped in shock at the command medallion which was now hovering in front of him. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.